Welcome. Today is the 6th day of Cheshvan, the 7th of November, and we're looking at the Partsuf, the model of the different opinions about settling the land of Israel in our times. And what makes our time special is that this is considered to be a time of exile. And there's a whole question, how do you come out of exile? So obviously exile ends when there's a majority of the Jewish population of the world lives in the land of Israel. That's the technical end of it, and once that happens, a number of things change. First of all the land-dependent commandments, called in Hebrew mitzvot hatluyot ba'aretz, they become obligatory from the Torah. Today they're only obligatory from the sages, meaning we have to follow them, but only it's like a decision by the sages that even though from the Torah we're free of them right now, we should still keep them. And the other thing that changes that's much more interesting for non-Jews is that we reinstate the order of sabbatical and jubilee years. And what that does is that it changes the entire relationship between the Jewish people and the rest of the world. There's many, many things that are dependent in that relationship on the keeping of the Jubilee and sabbatical years. We don't have time to get into all of them, but what people do today, there's people who go before Jewish court and they say that they want to be considered gerim, ger, not ger toshav, which means a non-Jew who's permitted to live in the land of Israel, meaning he's taken upon himself or herself the Noachide commandments. That really only has authority when we keep the sabbatical and jubilee years in an obligatory fashion from the Torah. And again, that happens only when there's no exile. And it makes sense because when we're in exile, so the relationship is not normal. There's a dependency. It's sort of like you can't be dependent on someone and then give them a title. The title that you give has to be because you're independent of them, because you see them in a certain light. But as it is, since most of the Jewish people don't live in the land of Israel, and we're not independent in that sense, most of them are not independent. They depend on the non-Jewish nations in which they live, and countries in which they live. So we can't offer that title, really. It's still done, but it's more a ceremonial thing. It doesn't really have halachic legal status. But okay, so I wanted to just try to fill this in, because our whole point here is to talk about these articles a little bit more deeply. So what we saw yesterday was these four opinions. Let's just recap them very quickly. The opinion of the Ramban, Nachmanides, who says that even in exile, the commandment to settle the land of Israel is from the Torah. The Rambam, Maimonides, who says that it's only from the sages. There's a whole issue called the three oaths. Oath like a vow. I don't want to get into it now. We probably won't have enough time anyway. This is a very big topic and has a lot of discussion around it and a lot of controversy around it. But we'll leave it for now. And the last two opinions that we saw yesterday, they come from the Tosafot, the commentary on Rashi, basically on the Talmud. The commentary on the commentary, usually. Sometimes Tosafot says something directly on the Talmud. But in any case, there we saw two different reasons for why there is no obligation at all in our time of exile. The first one was because we were afraid that it is difficult to come to the land of Israel because of the dangers of the journey. And the second one was that we're afraid that if a person comes and lives in the land of Israel, they will not know how to properly keep the land-dependent commandments. And again, we just said that according to most opinions, the land-dependent commandments, or some of them, not all of them, but some of them are from the sages now, but also some of them are still obligatory from the Torah. So this would be a bad, we would call a bad exchange. It would do you more harm than good. So that was that idea. Now the whole point that we're doing now is we're going to model them. And we said that the last two opinions don't seem to be so relevant, or they even seem to be, in a certain sense, strange. Like, what do you mean? It's like saying, again, we said this yesterday, a child who just turned bar mitzvah, so we would tell him, don't put on tefillin because you don't know yet how to keep yourself clean and this and that. We don't do things that way. We tell the person to start doing things, and slowly you learn. In any case, the way to model all of this is, because we have four opinions, obviously we're going to use the four letters of God's name. So let's see how this works. So the first opinion, which was from Nachmanides, which we said is that the obligation today is still from the Torah to settle the land of Israel, meaning to make aliyah, and we said that this was especially relevant in cases when one of the couple, the husband or the wife, wants to move to the land of Israel and the other one doesn't want to. Can one coerce the other, or tell him or her, okay, so if you don't want to, then give me a divorce, or we're getting divorced, and so on. So this opinion is the Yud, the first letter of God's name, which is always representative of the Sphira of wisdom. And the idea here is that this is also called the father principle. Wisdom is the father principle, Abba. And there's a very important principle in Kabbalah that anything that is from the Torah, obligatory from the Torah, a mitzvah deoraita, as we called it, that the written Torah is related to the father. There's a verse in Proverbs, Shema bani musar avicha, listen, my son, to the discipline of your father. And the sages explain that this means the discipline of your father refers to the written Torah. Then the continuation of the verse is, and to the Torah of your mother. And here the sages say this represents, or this is referring to the oral Torah. The mother is related to the oral Torah. The father is related to the written Torah. One of the ways to see this is a very simple idea, is that the written Torah comes from above to below. It's a revelation from above. The oral Torah is our creation, per se. It's us expanding on the tradition of homiletic principles that we received, that Moses received when he was at Sinai. So we're expanding on it. This is a human product. It's still done with divine inspiration maybe, but it's a human product. And so we have that the written Torah is coming from above, the oral Torah is ascending from below. And that is exactly how we perceive, at least in first approximation, the difference between the male and the female. The male, the masculine in the world, is descending from above, the feminine is rising from below. And so we saw this, for instance, in the flood, Noah's flood. There was water, rainwater, that was coming from above, and then there was the abyss with the waters coming from below. We explained this in last week's issue, that they represent science and Torah. Torah is the rainwater coming from above, the wisdom, the divine wisdom that's coming from above. Science, human endeavor to understand reality, to understand nature, is like the abyss overflowing from below. It's the motion from below to above. That's science, that's the feminine. And they need to join together. And without joining together, they don't create offspring. But the whole point is to connect them together. So the same thing is with the written Torah and the oral Torah. They need to be connected together. When we write an article, we don't differentiate between the written Torah and the oral Torah. We meld them together. We bring them together. The Talmud does the same thing. It's this understanding that the two have to come together. So here we have the Ramban, who was saying that the requirement to live, to settle the land of Israel, is from the Torah, that we would connect to the Yud, and then the Hey, the first Hey of God's name, which is also the sphere of understanding, and the mother principle, that's also how it's called, so that corresponds to the opinion of Maimonides, that in our time during exile, the requirement to live in the land of Israel is only from the sages, not from the Torah. These two, and this is a principle we need to remember because it's a very important principle in the Kabbalah, these first two letters, Yud and Hey, the mother and the father, wisdom and understanding, they're called two companions that never part. They're always together. Like we just said about the written Torah and the oral Torah, they're always enmeshed one within the other. They mold each other. They melt into each other to the point where you can't really tell the difference. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Now we have two more letters, Vav and Hey, the third and fourth letter of God's essential name, Havaya, the Tetragrammaton. So here, this idea of weighing things and saying, if you move to the land of Israel, if you live here, and you are required and obligated to keep some of the land-dependent mitzvos, the commandments that are land-dependent, and you won't know how to do them. So that is classic for what we call the Vav, the third letter of God's essential name, which represents the Sfirot from loving kindness to foundation. And the idea there is usually that the Sfirah that we usually use to designate this Vav, these six, the one we choose to represent them, is the one in the middle, which is called Tiferet in Hebrew. We usually translate it as beauty, but you could also, in this case, translate it as harmony. And the purpose of Tiferet, of harmony, of beauty, is to weigh, to bring together the six extremities, as they're called. The six extremities within this Vav. The Vav is equal to 6 in Gematria. So it represents the swaying and harmonizing between different aspects. And that's exactly this opinion that we saw, that it's not a commandment at all now, or we don't keep it at all now, because it's impossible to fully keep all the land-dependent mitzvot properly, and so on and so forth. And because of that, we're weighing the benefit versus the cost, and it's not worth it. So that fits into the slot of the third letter, corresponding to the third letter of God's name, Vav. And the final one is kingdom, the fourth letter, the second Hey. And here, obviously, this is related to the dangers of the journey, because whenever we're talking about physical reality, whenever we're talking about things that have to do with the corporeal, and here we're talking about physical dangers on the journey. Moreover, there's always danger in kingdom. There's an important verse from I believe it's from Job. It's Proverbs 5:5, and it says, "Her feet descend down unto death." And that is always translated in the Zohar or explained in the Zohar to relate to the sphera of kingdom. What does it mean it goes down into death? It means that there's danger. There's danger in creating this world. It's dangerous to create our world. Why is our world dangerous? Because you take the soul and you disconnect it from God and you bring it into a physical body where it's not aware of its origin, and you expect it to somehow follow God's commandments. And that is a big risk. So it's called, "Her feet descend down into death," because there's a possibility death, spiritually, death means lowering your stature, going into a place that's lower than where you could have been. So it's losing your status. That is what happens to the soul when it comes down into this world. So now we have this idea that the danger is related to the physical world. It's called Kol hadrachim b'cheskat sakana. All the roads are dangerous. And again, one could say that today kingdom has been rectified, and the roads are no longer as dangerous as they were. Maybe they're not dangerous at all, and maybe it's the easiest thing to come and move from anywhere in the world to the land of Israel. Maybe it's the easiest thing, and this doesn't hold anymore. But it doesn't ruin our partsuf. It doesn't ruin our model. And I hope that what you see now is that when you take even opinions that don't seem to be right, but they're opinions that appear in the oral tradition. They are part of the Torah. And they seem strange to us. When you place everything into a partsuf, into a model, in this case, corresponding everything to the 4 letters of God's name, everything finds its place. Everything becomes harmonious. That's one of the most important things about building these models. One of our goals is to see the harmony in all the opinions that the sages bring. Because all the opinions have truth in them. Sometimes you can't see it until you correspond the opinion in the right way and you see it from a bird's eye view with all the other opinions. Then you see that everything has a place. The same thing is true about families. The same thing is true about anything in our lives. If you're able to place it in context, if you're able to place it while seeing the bigger picture, then even things that to us seem to be superfluous or even negative, they suddenly find their place. And it's very important. I don't want to compare this, but this is really still in my mind after the election in the United States. People don't. I think that it's not well known. It's not so commonly known that most of the presidents, I believe it's 75%, something like 75%, from Abraham Lincoln and on, have been Republican. It's very uncommon, actually, to have a Democratic president, and it's something of the last few years. But you can see this, even though people may feel that they're hurt by the result of the previous election, or they're bemoaning the current election. The way that a scholar, that a true intellectual looks at things, and this is the rectification of the heart also, not just the intellect, the emotions have to feel this way, is that everything has its rightful place. And there are checks and balances in history also. There's leaning in one direction, then coming back in the other direction. Everything is needed. Everything has its rightful place. And we say this even, this is the most difficult thing to say, that even all the atrocities, all the difficulties, all the pogroms, all the terrible experiences that humanity has been through, and especially the Jewish people, we still see the world as run by God, and all the different aspects, all the different eras were needed to bring us to the final redemption. Everything has its place. Again, you can't say this to someone who's suffering right now, but when you look at things in perspective, that's the way to judge them. That's the way to ascertain their value. And then you understand that really everything we've been through, everything we're going through, is part of a divine plan. It's needed, it's necessary. And again, sometimes you feel that you're on the winning side, sometimes you feel you're on the losing side, but it doesn't change the fact of the matter that both sides are needed. So apparently in heaven they believe right now that the right ratio of Democratic to Republican presidents is 1-4. Still, somebody who's a Democrat says, I don't like it that it's 1-4. I would like it to be 1-2. Every other one, okay, maybe you can try to change it. But the point of the matter is to understand and see the value, the tremendous value of everything that we go through. Everything has a purpose in rectifying us. Everything has a purpose in bringing us to our final destination. So thank you for joining. This is our last class for this week, because it's just too early now to do things at the hour that we usually do. So Fridays won't be able to have classes for a while until sometime I think in February, when Shabbat starts later. So thank you for joining me this week, and I hope to see you on Sunday. All the best.